I think I knew that. He grew up, I've picked up in our conversations over the years, he grew up on a North Carolina dairy farm, so you know what he knows, right, Marcia, when you grow up on a dairy farm? I think Marcia Critch did that too. He got his higher education starting out at Guilford College, and then they list it there as Duke Divinity and then Duke University.
Right.
You got your seminary degree before you got your PhD?
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Right.
That's impressive. So he's got advanced degrees from both Duke University and Duke Divinity School. He's been a pastor. The one I knew about was Newcastle. Were there others as well?
Edward Hill in North Carolina and West Elkton for 1 year.
Oh, West Elkton over in Ohio. Okay. I didn't know about those, but I knew he'd been at Newcastle for several years. So a pastor among friends. Also the dean of Earlham School of Religion from just about the time Pam and I got here until about 2 years ago or 3?
5 years
Is it
ago.
5 years? Oh man, that's not possible. Dean of Earlham School of Religion for over 20 years. He is a coffee connoisseur and a superb coffee roaster, so you really need to know that. He's also kind of a poster child for heart patients. He was a really good one about 4 years ago, 3 years ago?
2.5.
2.5 years ago. That was during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And look at him now. He's just doing wonderfully. So all of that is Jay. Judy, I think, is a Hoosier. Am I correct about that? Yeah, and you must have met at Duke. They sat close to each other in Old Testament class at Duke University Divinity School. So that's how this whole thing got started. She is now an ordained United Methodist elder and minister and pastor, now retired from those things for the most part, still doing fill-in work when she's called upon. She is a superb chef. She's also an artist. We have evidence of that in our house. And both of them are world-class travelers. They have been everywhere I have ever heard of on this planet. So every time we talk with them, we learn really important things. And at the end of the little bio in the back of the book, it says that they consider their marriage to be a living example of ecumenicity with a Methodist and a Quaker minister in the same relationship. The personal stuff that I can add to what's in the book is just this. We came to Winchester from a year of traveling after 6.5 years living in Kampala, Uganda. When we arrived here, we went to some free events down at ESR, and I don't know if Jay was yet the dean, but when we first met him, ever since, it has been just the warmest welcome to come and participate and be there. And we were feeling like fish out of water. We were more African than American at that point, and we knew nothing. And Jay always affirmed us and welcomed us and showed us around and made us feel right at home at ESR. And we can't tell you how much that meant to us. He has been a source of consistent and compassionate listening when we've been discouraged or dismayed by something in our work. He and Judy both have been willing helpers in our Friendship Sunday celebrations here at Winchester Friends, and most recently in our 150th anniversary celebration. They are gracious hosts, always at their little slice of paradise down in the woods near Greens Fork, Indiana. I would bet you almost money that GPS doesn't even know how to find that place. It is so, you just feel like you're in a world all by yourself out there. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to reside. They are priceless friends, priceless examples to us, priceless mentors in this quest for meaningful and faithful discipleship. And it is a privilege to be their friends and to learn from them and to be ministered to by them. We are thankful that you've come to help us this evening. We wish that there were more people here, but we have the ones that God sent, and we'll be happy with that. So,
That's usually enough.
yeah, I think that'll work out just great. So if anybody online can't hear or anything like that, please get Pam's attention. She's over there monitoring, and we'll try to make sure that you can hear everything that's going on here. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Judy, for coming to be with us tonight. There will be some Q&A at the end, and I'll have this microphone to pass around, so write down your good questions now, okay?
Well, good evening. I never like being introduced. I just hate being introduced.
I guess I should have done it. It would have been 2 sentences.
But Ron always makes me feel like I'm probably better than I am. But if I live up to what he says, that would be tremendous. But thank you for that, Ron. And the fact that it's genuine and heartfelt is important and appreciated. So when we talked about my being here, one of the things Ron asked was that I might talk a little bit about how I came to write the book. And so I thought I would start with that. And once I've done that, we can go one of 2 directions. I have some things I've put together to talk a bit, to sort of start with the idea of sacramental living and move from that point forward. But I'd also be equally glad if having read the book, you have questions and things you'd rather spend time on than hearing what I've put together. I'm happy to go that way too. So we'll see. If you're still awake when I will tell you, after I've told you why I wrote the book, we'll see what seems right to the group. And if you need me to repeat anything, just let me know. I don't think I still sound so much like a North Carolinian that you can't understand me, but every now and then it happens. So if I get excited or something like that, that accent will come right back out. Well, like it ever goes away. But when I retired 5 years ago, people asked me what I was going to do. And I think that's because they were surprised that I was retiring. I retired on my last day of employment. It was my 59th birthday. So I retired a little early. And that's not something I've been planning to do for years, sort of working up to that. But and I think because of that, people thought that maybe I had something else lined up I just wasn't telling anyone about, that I was climbing a ladder, I was moving on to greener pastures. And it was really, really difficult for them to accept the fact that I didn't know what I would do, but I knew what I wanted to be. And what I wanted to be was to be faithful, whatever that meant. And I don't pretend to know what that meant. And I can only hope that that's what I'm doing now. But I wanted to be faithful. And the book, When the Spirit Calls, is one response to trying to achieve faithfulness in my continuing ministry and work, even though I'm officially retired from pastoring and from being a dean. And in all honesty, writing wasn't on my radar when I left ESR. But I noticed that shortly after that, probably half a dozen people at least of unrelated individuals asked me, well, do you plan to write your retirement? And they encouraged me to do that, or that they hoped that I would do so. And friends, if we're friends, at our best, we try to pay attention to what the community may see and be calling you to. And so enough people said it, I thought I should pay attention. And so I began to blog a bit just to test the idea, because blogging is cheap. You don't need a publisher to tell you it's good enough to be read. You don't have to pay to have things published. You don't have to worry about marketing, et cetera. You just write and put it out there and people read it or they don't. I mean, I'm sure you can do things to promote it, but it didn't require a huge outlay. And so I just began to blog to test the idea. And I liked blogging. Blogging reminded me of preparing sermons. I always liked writing sermons. And the reason is that it feels like such an inspirational process, and sometimes blogging feels that way as well. And in the meantime, Quaker Books, which is Friends General Conference's little press, invited a book proposal from me about any topic. that I wanted to write about. I think that was largely because Ellen Michaud was the clerk of their, what they call it, development committee, the publication committee. And she's the one who sent me an email and said, so what are you going to do in your retirement? Are you thinking about writing? If you are, we'd be interested in a proposal. We'd become acquainted when I invited her to teach in ESR's Ministry of Writing program as an adjunct faculty member. So for one or two classes, she came and taught for us. As far as I know, she'd never read any writing that I had written unless it was an ESR promotional piece. And so part of me isn't sure why she thought that a book was in order. But she said a photo that I had posted on Facebook of me sitting on a fallen tree across a trail in one of the state parks Judy and I visited gave her the sense that I was the guy who had it together and I had something to say. Make of that what you will. I now avoid sitting on trees and having my picture taken. But as I sat with the invitation to submit a book proposal to them, this book is what emerged. And why this one? I mean, I was a little surprised when a book on discernment is what rose to the surface for me. And the reason I was surprised is that, you know, in that work at Duke in my doctoral program, I was an Old Testament guy. And so I know lots about the Old Testament that I never really have much of a chance to talk about or write about. And that's probably good for everybody who'd have to listen to it. But that was my specialty. And while I was at ESR, I also developed an ability to teach with some sense of expertise on leadership. That came in response to students who came to me and asked me to do that. But spiritual formation wasn't something that I had intentionally tried to develop as a sense of expertise in or to really write or teach about. But this was a topic that sort of came to the surface as I sat and thought and prayed and waited. I didn't know if this was going to be the topic. I didn't want it to be of the navel-gazing variety, where discernment seems to consist of just an endless period of stewing your own juices. You know, you're just usually full of angst and so forth. But I didn't want it to be that. And I didn't want it to be one where discernment amounted to pretty much just a reason to procrastinate in the name of the Lord. We can't do anything yet. We're still discerning. We're still trying to decide, trying to make up our mind. I wanted to anchor discernment in what I thought were some of Friend's theological jewels that were often referred to, but seldom really unpacked and talked about. So in some ways, it's a surprise. But in other ways, I've come to think that this book reflects what my ministerial efforts have always been about. I realized some years ago that I think at my core, if you peel away all the onion layers, at my core, my work is about helping others identify and respond to their own divine promptings. And I've found that I can do that in multiple locations. So as a pastor with a congregation, there's an obvious ripe audience that you have some responsibility for their growth and development. I also found it occurred in an institution. You know, when I, for the institution itself, for the faculty, for the students at ESR, I remember the day. I don't know how many of you may have met John Puncheon, but John Puncheon was the Leather Rock Quaker scholar at ESR for a decade. He came from England to be with us for that period of time. And when John decided to retire, he came to my office and he told me his decision. And he said, I want to thank you because you have inspired me to do things I never would have dreamt I could do. And I can only hope that that's true. So for all Friend's strengths of being spiritually grounded, we often fall short of providing the resources that people need to really understand and mature in the process. And that's true from materials when the newcomer walks into the room to someone who's trying to learn more about Quaker faith and practice. The resources are kind of skimpy. And my opinion, you may disagree with this, we are great at history. Lord have mercy. I've never found any group that loves history as much as we do. We are great at history. Sometimes we're really good at activism, but we're not really good at theology, which means we leave it uncertain as to what we might believe or why we do what we do, or even if we're doing what we should be doing. And so, when your go-to systematic theologian is a 17th century work, thinking about Barclay's Apology, I think we've been underserving our people a bit. And what sort of happens is anything goes becomes the summary of what friends believe. And there's a lot of latitude there, but I want to say it's not really anything goes. So my hope for this book was that it would serve as a useful resource to any who are interested in thinking about how leadings and calls and service and ministry fit into their lives. And you all can help me know if this book's hitting that mark or if I need to work on a sequel, finally to get it right. So that's a little bit of how the book came to be written. And if this is the point where I stop and say, so are there things you want to talk about you've come hoping we discuss, or would you rather me continue talking about sacramental ministry as the next step in this? There will be questions along the way where I'm going to ask you to participate. So,
Yeah.
Wait. Turn me up.
Yeah.
Let me see. This got drawn in unnecessarily.
I need. Oh, look at that!
Technology.
I'm telling you.
Let that one.
Yeah. Now I've got to go back to the beginning and start over, don't I?
Try that.
All right. Is that better? Good. Okay. Well, in thinking about this evening, my starting, and thinking about the book, my starting places were universal ministry and sacramental living. I mean, those are just two jewels of Quaker, I would say Quaker beliefs that I think they're woven throughout a lot of early friends' writings. And for it to take on a practical dimension, it seemed useful to connect those to spiritual formation and personal call. And so you find chapters devoted to those in this book. Because personal call and spiritual formation, that's where we begin to puzzle out the pieces of how we contribute to universal ministry, how that connects with who we are and who God's called us and gifted us to be, how we participate in a world where the divine, according to Quaker understanding, is always potentially present. So when we first started talking about tonight, I thought I'd probably focus on universal ministry. But the more I worked on it, I've been directed to start with sacramental living. We will get to universal ministry. But as I was sitting with that, I thought that if the idea of sacramental living really clicked for us, that the universal ministry piece might be easier to step into, because sacramental living sort of reframes the way we see the world and our place in it, rather than us just starting from a place of, the world is however we describe it, whether that's good or bad or fallen or redeemed or what have you, and we're trying to figure out how do we sort of punch in little holes here and there and make a difference. So to help us with sacramental living, I would want to suggest we start by thinking about holy places. So in January of 2020, right before COVID broke out, the last trip we took before COVID hit, we visited the Middle East it was my second time there. Judy actually had been there 3 times because she got a chance to go when she was in college. And while we were there, I snapped a photo of a sign just standing out by itself, and it read, "A Holy Ground." And I just thought that was an odd sign just to put there. And I was a little taken by the inclusion of "a holy ground," because I think if I were to write the sign, I don't know how you would write the sign, but if I were to write the sign, I would just say "holy ground." I wouldn't use "a." And I thought, well, is this just peculiar English? Because sometimes that happens when foreign language start trying to translate themselves into another tongue. Or was it intentional? And what would be the difference between "a holy ground"? I guess "a holy ground" allows that there might be more than one instead of just "the holy ground." But what would be the difference between a holy ground and a not so holy ground? And then there's the fact that someone felt the need to mark it as though it's not obvious. So maybe holiness isn't obvious. And if it's not, how do we know? And so it started to beg the question for me, what makes a place holy? Is it location? Is it the remains there of what went on before? Is it the activities that currently take place? Is it history that has occurred over time? And who gets to decide what's holy and what's not? One of the things I remember from the first time I was able to visit the Holy Land, in many of those sites, it was hard to know where it really happened. And part of that was because it's like the Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox were having a competition. And so somebody gets to the place where they think Jesus was born and they go, "It's here." And then the other group comes along. They can't let the Greeks can't let the Roman Catholics have the place where Jesus was born. And so they say, "No, it's over here." And they build a shrine around it. And you'd find that kind of thing happen all over the place, that where important events happen. The birth happened here. This is where the hill of Golgotha was. I think it's now a bus parking lot. This is where Golgotha was. And someone else goes, "No, Calvary was over here." There's a church there. I think it may be the one with this holy ground sign in front of it. There's a church there that is supposed to be the place where the cross of Jesus was put into the ground. And when you go inside that church, there's this tile floor, and there's this hole that has this silver star around the hole, and you stand in line to see it, and you can put your arm down into that hole and touch the place in the ground where Jesus' cross was. Well, I couldn't. Because see, I've milked cows all my life. My forearms are too big. And so I got to about here and I got jammed. And so I never got to touch it. So this was in 1995, and I'm 3 years out of the doctoral program. And so I'm having this mental debate with my inner skeptic about places like this that claim to be holy ground. And are they or aren't they? And I look over, and my mother, who had gone with us as part of the group, had found this quiet place in a corner, and she was shedding tears as she thought about Jesus' suffering and death in that place on her behalf. That was holy ground for her, not so much for me, but important for me to see. But so what makes a place holy and who decides? And we friends, we like to play down holy ground. We call our buildings meeting houses, not churches, because we don't want anyone to think we think this might actually be the house of God. We play it down, and yet we have our places, I think. So Jordan Meeting House, in the presence in the midst, makes it on the itinerary of the Quaker tour. If you go to England, you got to go to Jordan and see that meeting room. Arch Street Meeting House in Philadelphia. I don't know if you've been there or how it is for you. It's on the historic tours there. But for me, when I go into Arch Street Meeting House, it's not because somebody put it on a tour. When I go out of that little public and museum area into the meeting room, I feel like I get a sense of the spiritual residue in that meeting, sort of left over, accumulated over the years from all the weighty worship that happened in that place. That feels like holy ground to me. I think it was 2004, I did a study of vital Quaker meetings, trying to find out what they held in common, and those things took me to London Grove meeting outside of Philadelphia, a little unprogrammed meeting there. And in the grounds around that meeting is a William Penn oak. So an oak that was planted in the time of William Penn. And for the people who are in that meeting, that oak is holy ground. I mean, I think they even have some rules about what can and can't be done under that tree now, because it's so old, they don't want to damage the roots. But while I was there, one of the people of that meeting who was showing me around and talking a bit about the oak said to me, "I hope I go before that tree does." I thought, that's an important tree. So I thought I might read a short blurb out of the Sacramento Living, just to put us into the text of the book. That way, if you've read it, maybe you'll remember it, and if you haven't, you aren't behind, because we will all sort of read through this together. It won't be very long, don't worry. My adoption of this perspective being Sacramento Living, my adoption of this perspective began accidentally in the rural agrarian lifestyle of my childhood. The chores assigned to a dairy farmer's son demanded regular time with animals and the earth. Much of that work included periods of solitude. When we are alone with our thoughts, we're introduced to a variety of traveling companions, our deepest interest, our greatest fears, our lingering hurts, and our freshest wounds. We discover the pathways and the capacity of our imagination. We become more keenly aware of our surroundings, wind blowing through tree branches, traffic noise from the nearest street, and crickets or birds in the background. We gain appreciation for the many manifestations of life's forceful energy, from the newborn calf to the tireless ant. Determination and a desire to thrive appear throughout the world. I cannot claim this would be a universal experience. Different personality types may respond differently to such a setting. I only know that for me, in between sound and within all of those elements, I became aware of what I consider to be the presence of the divine. I noticed another who appeared sacred and seemed profound. I felt accompanied. This sense resonated within the depths of my soul, convincing me of a unity and oneness among the fragmented pieces of creation that can each be consumed with their own small orbit. Lessons like that are not easily forgotten. Much later, as an adult, I decided to begin vegetable gardening. Frankly, the decision surprised me. As a child, my entire family participated in gardening, and I didn't really care for it. Weeding was no fun, especially as sweat burned my eyes on hot July days. Gathering potatoes turned up by the cultivator in rows that seemed to stretch a good country mile did not rank high on my list of favorite morning activities. Shucking a few armloads of corn would suck the life out of an afternoon. Yet here I was, years later, acknowledging an urge to take up the hoe again. As I lived into the experience, the wisdom of the decision was apparent. It was a way of reconnecting with my roots, as well as serving the desire for fresh food. A deep breath of freshly turned earth soothed my body. The feel of soil in my hands, even with the occasional earthworm, brought delight. I began to be conscious of what the rest of me had never forgotten. When soil, sunshine, and silence are present, God typically shows up alongside me. That accounts for the experiential dimension of my embrace of Sacramento living. Works like Wendell Berry's The Memory of Old Jack and Alice Walker's The Color Purple both required reading in an undergraduate contemporary theology course, had already started a reshape of my intellectual formation. Writings like those helped weave the lens and language of spirituality into the ordinary fabric of life. That a non-religious text could be the source of theological musing now seems obvious, but at the time, that was like tilling new ground for me. Barry knew that spirituality and the land are inseparable. Walker understood that God showed up in pain as well as on Sundays. A few years later, a seminary preceptor's comments on an Old Testament theology paper noted the shifts that were occurring in my thinking. He wrote, "Voila, a thesis statement. This is an excellent theology of God's presence. But what about soteriology, which is all about how do you get saved?" He named what I had not yet noticed. In gravitating toward a theology of presence in which many witnesses identified God as present and engaged in a wide variety of circumstances, the place of sin and redemption was radically shifted. Being the good Southern Baptist that he was, he dutifully lowered my grade to an A-. So, what about you for a moment? Do you have experiences of holy ground, holy places? What are they and what makes them that way?
Go for it, Terry.
You caught me. Nowhere on the same plane as what you're bringing, Jay, but simple little thing for me. In the morning, sometimes when I wake up, my mind starts filling of all the things I'm going to be facing that day. I find it hard to let go and refocus and get into tune with my quiet time with God. Simple little thing like coming in here to my office and remembering what the Lord told Moses when he came up on the burning bush. For me, the thing is to just sit here quietly. I take my slippers off and turn around and open the doors to my cabinet. Just that simple act of taking my shoes off. That makes me feel like it's holy ground. Nothing real profound about it, but it is to me.
Thank you. That bodily sensation, I think, can create a shift in your internal dimension. I think I can appreciate that practice.
So it helps me make up my mind to focus on what's important right then too. That's whatever it does.
I get the impression that Jay is not going to move on until at least 6 people speak, so.
Go for it. I've said my piece.
Yeah, five to go now.
Sharon, you're in M&O. Time for you.
I guess for me, it's living things. I was just sitting here, obviously trying to think of an answer to your question. And one thing that came to me was I had breast cancer years ago, and I'm fine, and had, what we have, radiation therapy. And after that, I just became totally aware of like an ant, that if I stepped on that ant, the ant was gone. And that just kind of followed through next to a plant or a tree, anything that had that spark of life in it kind of became holy to me. I've lost a lot of that. I'd like to regain some, but not through the same experience. But yeah, I still look at an ant and think, wow, that's amazing.
Thank you.
I don't think of one place as being holy ground. Holy ground to me is when God plants someone in my life that changes my life. Whether it's when he had open heart surgery and some lady was there, never saw her before and never have seen her since. But her essence of being there and sharing our beliefs made that place holy ground. But there are several other times, not just that one. It was people that made it because God brought them to me.
Well, so far, I like everything that everybody else said better than what I'm thinking I was going to say. But when I was, I don't know how old I was. I was young. And Patsy may remember this, I don't know. But I had aunts and uncles that lived on farms. I didn't grow up on a farm. But sometimes I enjoyed going to the different farms and spending time and what the different animals were and things. But always liked the cats a lot. And some of them were kind of wild and what have you. But the one thing I remember one time was going, and I couldn't leave the farm, but I went down the lane, down to the middle of the lane, and there was kind of a little hill in the lane. And I sat there and I remember praying, and I remember thinking of, just a lot of things, a lot of questions and a lot of things. And I was young, and I was really young. And when I would go there, if I had a chance, I would go back to that spot. And we visited, I went past there a few years ago, and I looked to see if that little race was still there. And I remember one time I went back to the cats and the animals, but one cat followed me down there later, or came later, because it saw me there, I guess. I don't know, but it went to sit with me there. And I always thought that was kind of cool, because I always did like cats, but I thought I worried that it might go on out to the street and get hit, but it went back with me then. It's just things like that, and why we remember moments and we don't remember sometimes things that are so important, and other people remind you of their moments, but we don't have the same moments.
Well, thank you for that. Hopefully that wasn't too hard. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is because I want us to try to remember or recall what it's like when we encounter that holy ground, when we know we're in a place where God is present. And one of the things that I think, now that we remembered that, I think sacramental living does us a favor, because sacramental living erases many of those lines that systems impose in order to label this place as holy and this place is unholy. And instead, it embraces the idea that the divine presence is not absent anywhere, and that we can notice it. we can notice it. I mean, as you were just saying, the people who come in at certain moments who are important in that moment, and you may never see them again. So if that presence isn't absent anywhere and we can notice it, then what does that open up for us in terms of how we go through life? If there's that of God within us, and this begins to build on that, if there's that of God within us, which friends hold as one of those things that whatever else we may argue about and disagree about, we can sort of agree on that, even though we probably don't all mean the same thing by it. But if there's that of God within us, then just think about that. There is nowhere then where we are that God is not also there.
Amen.
So it would seem then that the potential for dialogue, or however it is you interact with the divine, is everywhere that you are. And if you think of that of God in all people, then that also means that not only is God there because you're there, but it also means that everyone you meet brings with them the potential of a divine encounter. It's as basic as Jesus saying, where 2 or 3 gather in my name, I'm in the midst of them. So sacramental living starts to erase those boundaries. And if we think about Fox's words of walking cheerfully throughout the world, speaking to that of God in all people, then it keeps us mindful of that potential, and perhaps of the potential of those moments, and possibly helps keeps us ready to engage in those moments. And that's a huge boost in our own ability to stay centered and focused on how God may use us, what we may have to offer, of ways that we might contribute. It keeps us respectful of others. It helps us see beyond the surface. That's a challenge, I would say. It is for me. I imagine it is for you. It can be a challenge if you start going down that path to think, well, but where is God in unjust situations? Where is God on occasions of violence? And that is hard. But I think looking for that sacramental wrinkle is where we are likely to find what Quakers refer to as a third way. That when we start looking for where God is, we start to see new possibilities, and we can reframe those moments. We can open a new possibility. Maybe that's idealistic, but it's my hope. So as you think about the holy ground, when you have moments to continue pondering that, ask yourself, what makes a place sacred for you? What makes it not sacred for you? If such distinctions exist, how do we recognize that some places are holy and others we're not so sure about? Does it take a sign out front? Who gets to decide where holiness is and isn't? I have, when I was at ESR, next door to us is Bethany Theological Seminary. And about 10 years ago, they hired a new president, and he and I would go to lunch once a month, just to keep communication open between the seminaries, try to talk about what was going on, keep each other aware of any changes that might be coming. And along the way, we developed a friendship. And so when it came time for me to retire, we were going out to lunch, and I said, I want to make this offer to you. I know you're busy, and perhaps this is it, but I said, if you would like to continue meeting once a month, go out to lunch, I said, I'm willing to do that. I said, I value our friendship to start with, and I also know what it's like to be in your position, to have no other peer around that you can really unload on. I've been where you are. You can tell me anything, and I won't care what you think about it, how you feel about it. You can just unload on me if you want. And he wanted to do that. So we've been doing that now. It's coming up on 5. Well, no, we passed. It's 5 years now. We've done that. We haven't missed many months. And as we were thinking about doing that, now this is just me, somewhat contrary or ornery or irreverent, I don't know, but I also wanting to do something different. So where are we going to lunch in Richmond, Indiana? Because I get tired of chains. And anyway, I said to him, what if we choose a different dive bar every month for lunch? And he looked at me like I might have lost it. And I said, well, think about it. First of all, it's unlikely you'll run into any of your staff there. So we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I said, and number two, I said, it'll give us a chance to support the local economy, because most of these are individually owned. They aren't chains. I said, and there are people who may or may not struggle. I don't know. I said, but it also lets me see a part of Richmond I don't see otherwise. And part of what I think we need to do is get out of our little circles, our orbits, where we only see the same people, and mostly people like us. And I said, plus, who gets to decide that a dive bar is off limits? I mean, if the idea of being in the same establishment with alcohol is a problem, that's one thing, but it also takes off about everything with the fast food restaurants anymore. I said, so, we aren't going there to drink or carouse or any of that. We're going there for lunch. It'll be mediocre food at best, probably. But so that's what we've done. And we've been some places that I've never been. We've been some I don't want to go back. And there've been a few that we decided we weren't going into once we got there. But we've also found that in those places, we have genuinely and generally been welcomed, stared at by the clientele who knows we aren't part of the regular crowd, appreciated by the waitresses because we tip, and usually we're the only people there eating a meal. But it's just turned out to be sort of a joke, and over time people are finding out, that they're going to these anyway. But all that's to say, those meals, those conversations, that friendship has been like holy ground wherever we were occupying 2 seats in a building. So sacramental living gives me the liberty to say, I don't accept your designation of this is an unholy place. I'm going in as who I am and be who I am, and we'll see what difference that might make. So holy ground, we take the barriers away, because any place is a place where God may be present. We may have an opportunity for ministry. We may receive a message from those who are there, because there is a negative effect to here but not there. I think most of the time when people live with you can go here but not there, this is holy, this isn't, at some level they're trying to protect what they think is right and pure, and they protect themselves by staying away from what might taint them or hurt them. But I think the effect is, as we begin not to expect God to be there, we turn away from there. We even dismiss it as important. We consider it to be other, it's unworthy, and of our time, it's unworthy of our care. And that affects how we live, where we're willing to go and be present or offer ministry, and where we avoid. So what if we decide that only certain people are holy, or only certain ones have that of God within them? Well, for one thing, it leads to an elevated priesthood, which friends have often railed about. And so then ministry becomes their work, it's not ours. Or we can ignore the others because God's not in them. And over time, we may begin to consider them, what's some of the language? Over history, different groups have been seen as heathen, barbaric, savage, infidels, unworthy. But if the potential of the sacramentality of all life can sink in, maybe we'll grasp that what is true of places is also true of people. And so imagine the whole earth as God's playground. And if that's too whimsical, imagine the whole earth as God's mission field. Same thing, but it sounds more serious. And suddenly you're right back into Matthew 25. What did God command the church? Well, to go forward and to teach and to preach and to baptize. So sacramental living, where we are willing to say we can encounter God anywhere, we can go anywhere, we can be met by others who have that of God within them, and we ourselves have that of God within us, it starts, I think, to change the way that we see life around us. We see our neighborhoods, we see our role, we see our responsibility. Because what does the phrase, "there's that of God in every person," also imply? Not imply, I guess, state, insist, there is that of God in you. And if there's that of God in you, then you contained the potential to be that one who speaks to a situation, who offers wisdom that may be beyond what you even knew, but you have the opportunity to make that kind of contribution in the normal work of life, the normal routines. You don't need a collar, you don't need a pulpit, you don't need a degree. You just need to be faithful to what that of God within you calls you to. So I'll put a comma there, maybe not a period yet, and just stop and ask you. So when you think of the phrase, that of God in every person, what's that mean for you? Any takers on that one? And I won't try to outweight you. I mean, if you don't have anything to say, we won't. But
It means I don't get to choose.
Say more about that.
It means that I don't get to choose who God is in and who God isn't. Because I think a lot of times, I don't want to see that of God in somebody else. And the fact is God is there, whether I want to see it or not.
I really think sometimes it's hardest to find it in me and than to find it, than to see it in somebody else. And I think that's something that we really have to work on, because if we don't love ourselves, then it's hard to, how do you love your neighbor?
So is it asking too much to ask why it's hard to see it in yourself?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that's, in a way, I'm saying, boy, I'm special if I can find it, when I can find it. And maybe sometimes when I do find it, I do think I'm special in some way. But
Well, you
not
are
that-
special. You just
Yeah.
aren't more special
Right.
than anyone else.
But most of the time, I'm pretty much tend to put myself, no, I'm not as good, you know. I think I prefaced what I said a while ago. Everybody else came up with something better, and they did. And I believe it. But yeah, I think it's easy to put yourself just not, I think that's something, it's very hard sometimes to say, maybe we've been taught that in a way, to be humble, which is fine. But it should be there with us as well as with everyone else.
Thank you.
I have often told people that this whole thing is just dancing on a wire. It's a balancing act. There's so much low self-esteem in our culture now, and people do the most outlandish things possible in order to be noticed, in order to be valued by a peer group that they seem to value, and in the long run, they do themselves so much harm by some of the crazy stuff that they do, trying to get that hole filled. And when I'm dealing with someone like that, I just want to say to them, do you realize that Jesus thought you were good enough and important enough that he went to the cross for you, that he died for you? That is an eternal stamp of value and worth. And there's nothing you can do to undo that because he saw that in advance and went to the cross for you. It is personal as well as corporate. But then Ellen is also right that arrogance is also a significant problem in a place like culture like ours, and that has no place in the life of Jesus followers either, because we realize that we didn't earn that favor. It was just given as a gift. But that thing of just a couple of weeks ago, we were just dealing with this about 2 weeks ago in our Sunday morning worship sharing, and I wrote in there that there are an awful lot of people that I meet who have buried that of God so deep under layers after layer after layer of hedonism, of secularism, of self-exaltation, all this stuff that is so commonplace in our culture that sometimes it's really hard to see in them. But it's why it's important to me as a friend to just know this is not an opinion, this is a fact, that there is that of God there. God created a space in every person I will ever meet for God to be able to speak and to do business with that person. In some of those spaces in people, God is getting beat up pretty bad, but that space is still there and it's still available so long as they are drawing human breath, and we dare not give up on them because God hasn't. That seems what's important to me.
So sacramental living, I think, takes us back to that place where universal ministry then looks like an obvious next step. As you remember that in this sacramentally charged world, that you have the opportunity, you have the leading, you perhaps will have a calling to a ministry that's sustained over time, but you have those opportunities to contribute to this sacramental flow whereby God's work is being accomplished in various venues of life. So universal ministry comes right up to the surface because if you remember from the book, universal ministry can be virtually anything that you feel God has called you to do or to offer as service or care in the world. And so we all have that opportunity. Indeed, I think we have a responsibility to participate in that work of ministry and service just in the regular flow of our lives, not requiring you to pick up and move necessarily, but just a regular flow of lives, flow of our lives. Judy tells me not to cross my arms. She says it. Sometimes I think I can't think if I don't, but that's not true. But what I wonder is, so with that foundation among friends about thinking about this world where God is present and where we can experience that and we can make contributions that help contribute to God's work, that how is the concept of ministry valued among friends with whom you associate? And so that may mean mainly here at Winchester Meeting. But is ministry here seen as somebody else's work? Is it seen as all of our work? Is it seen as just preaching and teaching, or is care for your neighbor or helping the homeless, or I don't know what else you may want to plug into the end of that sentence, but how would you say the concept of ministry is valued here among this group? Anyone speak to that? And folks on Zoom, you're welcome to chime in. Well, it has a value too great to be spoken of.
And I don't want us to speak because.
I know.
Let me do it, because I talk all the time. I think everything you named, we're doing in some way. It's not, and it seems Ron and Pam do a lot of it. I can't deny that they aren't the ones that are doing a lot, but we are all doing. We all have little niches that we fill and things we do. But some things are hard. Some things are physically harder for some people to do than other things. And I can name a bunch, but I don't know that Terry has a great telephone ministry now that he talks to a lot of people, and they need him to talk to them. He talks to me sometimes, and I need him to talk to me. I think we don't give up and say we're too old or we're too sick or we keep. We're here, and we're here for each other and for people that need us. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah.
Or is that, or?
And it's great that you, even if you're hesitant to say what you might be doing, you're able to name it in the people that are around you. And so you're able to help affirm and uplift and reinforce the importance of what we do for one another.
Just in the last year, and most recently just in the last couple of months, Norm Peters has conveyed value to my ailing, aging father in Kansas City in ways he'll never really know, just by making a Kansas City Chiefs home plate for him that hangs on his wall, and he's so proud of it. And now he's got a Kansas City Chiefs gridiron football thing to hang on his wall beside the baseball one. And that is ministry. Well, Norm is skilled as he can be in a workshop, and he did that stuff with no prompting. He just did it out of kindness because my dad gets into their Bible study Zoom meetings. But we have tried here, it was one of our 5 growing edges way back when we first named Growing Edges for Winchester Friends, that we would come to more fully appreciate this understanding of universal ministry. We've been working on that for a long time. And, you know, a lot of this is because you taught us most of what we know. But we have been working at this, and we try really hard to emphasize that. Pam and I would love to work ourselves out of a job. We would love to see ministry so freely given among this faith community that we're no longer needed here. I don't think we're there yet, but it's always been a goal and always will be.
You guys all know Gage. And I'm telling you this because this is what he talked to us over. It's hard for him to go work in an aluminum foundry and to do a job that really isn't anything that he really wants to do. But that's where universal ministry is that no matter where we are or what we're doing, that we understand that we're interacting with people, that we're bringing God. If we do believe that there is that of God in every person, we're bringing God into those places, and we're being a minister and helping. And that's where it is so important for a faith community to teach that, because Gage needs to see that as his mission, where he's doing, that he has purpose today, that he doesn't have to wait until he gets a really important job, that he can do what he can today where he is.
This is going to be jumbled. I grew up Catholic, and certainly in the days that I was growing up, universal ministry was not not one of their whatever. And yet, as most people here know, I spent 2 years in a monastery about over 20 years ago now. And they very much emphasized universal ministry, even to the point that you were given like a job every year. And for the sisters who were in the infirmary, their job was to pray. And so they didn't let you off the hook just because. When I started here, Ron did and still does emphasize universal ministry. And that was kind of a new concept to me. And it's one that makes a lot of sense. I can't say I'm good at it, but I at least know that I should be, or that I should try harder. So that to me is a very important part of being a Quaker.
Thank you.
I wish Kendra was here to tell you, for Jay's fault, I'll tell you, Kendra's our granddaughter going into her last year of dental school. And it's not just dental school, it's a mission for her too. And she told us the other day, a young girl who was disabled, mentally disabled, was in, and her parents couldn't get, she wouldn't brush her teeth, she wouldn't take care of herself, she'd never let a dentist look at her mouth. And before she left there, Kendra not only had her brushing her teeth, she had her flossing her teeth, and she had her so proud of herself that she could do it. She was telling everyone. And that gladdens my heart that she brings that to someone who's in need. And it's not just dentistry to her.
And that Kendra will be heading to Laredo, Texas on Sunday this coming week for a week of free clinics down at the Mexico border for these immigrant camps where people are sort of being held. And the Missions and Social Concerns meeting committee yesterday decided that Winchester Friends would shoulder a pretty good load of the cost of her going there. Those are the ways that our meeting has tried to encourage this understanding of universal ministry. A couple of things. Pam talked about Gage. He came and enjoyed dinner with Jay and Judy with us this evening. And he originally told us he was going to come over here for this meeting. But he told Jay when they walked in, the Lord has called me to go to ministry. He wanted to be sure and impress Jay. He felt like there was an opening. His brother is struggling right now, and there was an opening of time for him to go and see his brother right at 7 o'clock. So he exited and is doing that. But he already, as a really young Christian, is understanding that it doesn't matter what you do to earn a living. This ministry is everyone's calling. So that's really important. Also, Suzanne, she was a school teacher when we first met her. There were several other teachers in our meeting back in those days too. And I always told them, you are in the front lines of ministry because you have exposure to those kids all day, every day in ways that churches never will have access to them. And if you don't make that ministry, it's just a horribly wasted opportunity. So it all resonates with exactly what you're saying, Jay. Anyone else?
I don't have any trouble finding that of God in Suzanne. Suzanne. And she's always she's there for us. She's solid, and I appreciate her a lot. Everybody else.
She's part of the family of God. She's a mom.
Well, I had, at one point, had thought about trying to end with a writing exercise, but I don't think everyone would have pencils or paper, and so I'm going to just let you carry this with you and work on it on your own if you're so inclined. To begin with, just as you sit and do whatever it is you do for your quiet time, I would encourage you to try and recall moments in your life, whether they're recent or whether they're old, where you felt prompted by an inner urge to act or to speak in a certain way. And try to recall what that experience was like. You might even think, ask yourself if you visualize yourself as a minister, and if you do, if you don't and you try it now, what are the reactions that are created within you? You know, does it fill you full of anxiety, or does it feel like, yep, this is comfortable, I'm doing this, I can continue to do this? And then, and this is what we would have, well, this is where the writing would have come in with a little bit of a preface. When I developed for students at ESR a program in entrepreneurial ministry, one of the things that became really important in helping them make progress forward, because they could talk about what they wanted to do ad nauseum, they could dream their plans, etc., and never go anywhere. And so it became standard practice at multiple times throughout those courses to get them to focus on the next step. What is the one next step you need to take in order to offer the ministry God's calling you to offer, to be the minister that God wants you to be? What next steps might be appropriate to give further attention to identifying and nurturing the gifts you have if you aren't certain already? But I found that if you can get people to really lock into thinking about next steps, they take account of where they are now, and the rest doesn't seem so big and overwhelming, just one step at a time. So what's the next step that you might like to take in order to live more fully into this idea of being one of those universal ministers who are walking cheerfully throughout this sacramentally charged world, helping God do God's work? And with that, unless you have other things you'd like to talk about, I believe we're done.
This is where you can try to stump the band, ask Jay something from his book that he can't remember or whatever.
Yeah, well, that could be there.
I've got a page of just brief notes about each of these chapters, and it all does really follow along exactly after what you've already said this evening. I sure appreciate this. Anybody online that wants to offer something or ask something? Terry is unmuted.
For once, I'm listening.
I said, I didn't understand.
He said for once he's listening.
For once.
No slur intended, Ron.
Well, thank you all for bothering to read the book, and thank you for caring enough to come and be part of the nice discussion. I appreciate your being here. I hope it's been enjoyable or entertaining or useful in whatever way. And so thank you for that. Enlightening, okay.
What's your next step, Jay?
My next step, I'm going to speak at, well, there's two things, I guess I'd say. I'm going to speak in August at North Carolina, what's now called Friends Church, North Carolina, after the little dust up they had. So that's my next step as far as working with this. And They also have asked me to do a workshop with this book, so that's the next step. The thing I'm doing at the moment, which is really outside the boxes of what I've done up to this point, I've started a little LLC called 7 Baskets Full, where I and my partner are doing some helping people with some retirement planning and trying to also help them think about ways they might position their assets to benefit the causes they care about so that they can do good in the world when they're done with them. And part of that also is giving a seventh of whatever we earn in that away to causes where we see people trying to do good work, good ministry in the world. So didn't expect to be doing that after I retired, but you know, when the Spirit gives you a little kick in the pants, you just need to trot on down that path and see what happens. So oh, I do have another book coming out in November. It's coming out from Barclay Press. It's a collection of some of those blog articles I've written, and it's positioned around the testimonies. So we'll see once they're done with it if it looks like what I thought it did when it went in. But if you like this one, actually you could read that blog and decide if you thought it was worth investing for the book. So I do continue to write and enjoy that quite a bit. Well, Judy's my shameless promoter in ways that I'm not. The address is jmarshallonline.com, and the only reason it says online is because somebody already had jmarshall.com. And while I might not have liked to have used my name as the title for the website, if I had named it something else, you wouldn't have known what that was, and you wouldn't have remembered it, but hopefully you won't forget my name. So if you're having trouble sleeping at night, pull up that webpage, read a couple of blogs, you'll be gone in no time. Anything else, Judy, I need to tell them about? I may have corn to give away a little later.
We will share the blog.
All right.
You need to close this out.
Oh.
I want to get even. I just came because I thought Judy was
You thought she was singing, didn't you?
singing.
I know. Thank you, Ellen. I don't blame you. That's a better reason to come.
I am really thankful. I am always happy to be under your teaching, and so I'm thankful for your time with us tonight. And thank you all for showing up. Thank you for the online people. I appreciate you being here. And I have this recorded, and we will make it available to people who could not be here today. And also I will, I'm stuck to the tape. And also we will, I have this recorded. There's one other thing I was going to say. Oh, I will share on, we will share the blog piece with that address for you to see, because every time you write something, I just read it and I'm just so blessed by it. So I think it's an important thing to see. So we'll make sure you have those assets available to you. So is there anything that we want? Okay. I thank you all for being here, and please go in peace. Thank you for your presence.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Did you want to end this?